Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us. And first, I wanted to thank Smernita. I'm sure you're out here somewhere, and Nira. They've been our thought partners on this report over the course of almost the last 6 months. We started working on this in September, and as we started thinking about today in the India Philanthropy Forum of 2014, 6 months ago, the question was, what can we work on to sort of provoke a dialogue? And as we thought about what Dusra is building this ecosystem around the girl child, we said, what would it take to build an ecosystem? What actually constructs and makes a successful ecosystem to tackle society-wide challenges? And that's the genesis of this report. Dinker's my co-author on this as well, and he's actually going to lead us through a lot of the insights. But this is an incredibly important topic. Are there slides you can see up there? I actually can't tell. Oh, there they are. Okay, that's great. This is an incredibly important topic. So what we wanted to do this morning was just take a few minutes just to share some of the key insights from the report and the work which you now have in front of you. And so there are two, I'm going to leave you with sort of a few key messages. One is a vibrant ecosystem that addresses the maternal, girl, newborn, and child health is the need of the hour. India's made a substantial amount of progress in this universe over the last 20, 25 years, but we have a long way to go. An ecosystem of stakeholders is actually fundamentally critical for tackling this. And we'll talk about what constructs an ecosystem. It's just not funders, it's not just the beneficiaries, it's the NGOs, it's people who provide infrastructure, people who actually create awareness as well, and we'll talk through each of the roles of each of these players. The other thing that's great is that India has actually tackled society-wide issues like HIV, like polio, with effective ecosystems that involves these types of stakeholders. And we'll talk through some of the learnings from that. And so closing this gap on the needs in the RMNCH ecosystem will require all stakeholders. And we'll talk through those. A fundamental part of this ecosystem is funding, right? India can develop and mature an effective RMNCH ecosystem over the next 20 years. And so what we mean by that is we actually think there's an opportunity to close the gap on the MDG goals and other goals within the next 20 years if the funding can be achieved, right? As this economy grows, as government expenditures on healthcare increases, we can do it. But there will be a gap over the next 15 to 20 years that needs to be plugged by philanthropic capital, domestic and foreign philanthropic capital. And that is quite key. But it's not just the funding. Philanthropy can play a role in mentoring NGOs, by creating trust in the system, and a number of other different roles. So the role each of you can play is actually fundamentally critical in this society-wide challenge. I'm going to ask Dinker to take us through some of the insights in the next 8 minutes, I guess.
Good morning, everybody. So as we walk through the report, as we look at the insights, we should start with what is our point of departure. So what we've laid out here is how have we made progress on maternal health parameters. We've looked at two here. There's maternal mortality and there's anemia, the two lines you'll see on the chart. As you see over the years, we've actually made very good progress. We've actually cut down on some of these things. Anemia is showing a slight uptick, but mortality has come down pretty dramatically. But then there's still a very, very substantial gap, both to our Millennium Development Goals and also to where a developed country like the US is. Now the story for child is actually pretty much the same. There's been very, very good progress, and I think we should take pride in that. But there continues to be a gap to where we should be. Now, as Arpan pointed out, what does it take to actually address this gap? We believe it takes an ecosystem, and an ecosystem is a collection of various stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders? So let's start. Right at the top is probably funding. So you do need some amount of money, and this money can come from a range of stakeholders. There's government in there, there's private, there's corporates in there, and there's also the multilateral agencies in there. You need awareness. Now awareness has different parts to it. There is international awareness, which probably is led by some of the multinationals. There is the media, which needs to actually drive more public awareness within the country. And then there's the content around what is the awareness you're creating about. There's some amount of content creation which needs to come, and that comes from some of the think tanks and the research agencies. So that's the second stakeholder. Moving further, you need a set of coordination bodies. Now, these are the people who will actually orchestrate the ecosystem. Now, what are the roles? There is a role around a strategy for what we need to do. So what's our RMNCHA strategy? Where do we want to get to? Second, there is the orchestrator, so to speak, the core of the coordination body, which could be the NHRM, the National Rural Health Mission, or the National Health Mission now. And then there's the data and the metrics. So nothing succeeds like success, and for us to know success, we need to actually be able to track the data and the success we've created in the ecosystem. Moving further along, you have the infrastructural partners, providers. Now, this again is actually the physical hard infrastructure, which is the health centers and the community health centers. There's an angle of technology and innovation in there. So technology breakthroughs can actually drive down cost, can actually add much more vibrancy to the ecosystem. And then there is the bodies, the people, the feet on street who actually will drive some of these processes forward. And then you have the primary interventionists, who are the front line, who actually link up to the beneficiaries. So this in many ways is the entirety, the chain of our ecosystem, grouped into 6 broad buckets of the roles they play. The other thing to note is the interactions are not linear. It's not one going to the other, going to the third. You actually see a fairly complex web of interactions across these bodies. It's actually, we should not look at an ecosystem in isolation and as simple cause and effect. That there can be a single cause with multiple effects, and there can be multiple causes with single effects across the landscape. So that's the ecosystem. Now, if we look back, we as a country have had enormous success in actually driving outcomes on some major public health issues. So HIV is what we'll talk about a little. Now, as we think about success in public health issues, we should think through how is that success achieved. Stepping back, we basically believe it actually happens in 4 stages. Now, it's very hard to have a 0-1 definition between the stages, but you'll know a stage once you see it. There's the seeding stage, where there's a problem, there's an issue, there's a crisis out there which needs to be addressed. There's an early growth stage, where there's a response you'll see actually in the ecosystem. There's rapid growth, where the response actually exceeds the crisis, and you'll see the crisis starting to come into control. And then there's maturity, where the ecosystem is self-serving, and then and the disease, the issue is also in control. So in HIV, we believe, and as I pointed out, it actually took us about 26 years to get here, from sometime in the mid-80s when the first cases were detected, right down to now when the disease may not be in complete control, but it's actually, the outlook is reasonably stable. Now you can see the prevalence, that's the red line on the chart, went up and then came down. The blue line, which is the funding, which is a proxy for looking at the ecosystem activity, actually tracks that. In the initial years, it's very close to the floor of the chart, and then it actually rises through the phases, and now it's more or less stable. There's some form of an equilibrium in the ecosystem. So this is how HIV was addressed. Polio, again similar. The red line is the outcomes we achieved, and the blue is actually a proxy for our ecosystem action, which is the children immunized here. Early years, slow, but then ramps up as the ecosystem matures and evolves. Now, thinking through RMNCH+A, the mother and girl child ecosystem we are talking about, we are right in the middle of the chart in the gray, at the left end of the gray zone, now which is about 2011, and the metric here is child. We've used one particular child metric to see what can we do. We're somewhere in the 60s, early 60s, depending on which data you look at in this time frame. We really have 3 paths we can follow. There's a path which is do nothing, which is you'll stay static where you are. There is continue doing the same, ceteris paribus, everything stays the same. You will actually bring these you will bend the curve, you will actually improve the outcomes. But for you to get to your target of 19, it might take you up till 2055, real out there in the future. We don't necessarily need to settle for that path. We can actually bend it, bring it forward, and we can achieve these objectives by 2035. But that will actually take substantial, it'll take changes. It'll take an ecosystem, which we talked about, and it'll also take funding. So the intent is we should try and aspire and actually try and achieve these goals in 2035 by bending this curve. So as we talk about bending the curve on the previous page, what is it that we really need? Now, the red line on this chart you'll see, that's the gap we'll end up having. So and how does the gap come from? It's actually what the government, what is required to actually spend. That's the red line is actually the money needed. The blue line is where we'll end up with the government investing aggressively. So now that is, so you can go up till about 1.5% GDP over the next 10 years and then take it up further, per percentage spent on health. And the gap is the funding gap we need to solve for. For us to achieve the outcomes by 2035, we will have to front load the capital which is invested into this space. The gap in 2025 is significantly broader than it is in 2035. So it's a $12 billion gap in 2025, which will have to be plugged from non-government sources. And the gap will, over time, you will find as the economy gets larger, the government will start catching up and the funding requirement will not be there. So just to summarize, we need an ecosystem and we need to front load some of the investments we make into the ecosystem. Thank you.